Olean and salutations to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet. I'm here today, the 7th of August, 2021, to say a few words about the problem with Nuremberg 2.0. Now, I'm guessing, that some of you have heard this expression, you've encountered this meme, Nuremberg 2.0. Actually, there's quite a lot of talk about it here and there on the internet. And what's it all about, Rome? Well, it appears that in the mind of some tads around the planet who are conscientious and observant, and who can think rationally and exercise critical scrutiny to what is told to them by the authorities and by the media, some of these tads are calling for something like a replay of the Nuremberg trials, so-called. Now, why on earth would they be doing this? Well, let's look at the situation for a moment, if you don't mind. According to those who propose this event, this so-called trial, there is right now, and has been for some time, a crime in progress. There's a crime being committed across the entire planet. And it is a crime of genocide. Now, how is this crime set up? How has this crime been established? Well, if you investigate it, as anyone can, and there is each day a growing body of evidence about this crime, you'll find that the entire program, the entire plan of the crime and its objectives and all that are based on a deceit, a primary deceit. And this deceit, as you all know by now, or you certainly can know if you pay attention, this deceit comes into play through a medical fraud. And at the center of this medical fraud, there is a pestilence, a plague, known as Rabbit Rabies. So what exactly is Rabbit Rabies? Well, it's something that you might have, that everyone might have. You can have it without appearing to be sick. Therefore, you can have it asymptomatically, as the saying goes, and you can transmit it to others, even though you don't show any signs of being ill. The rabbit rabies is, as you may have heard, extremely contagious and extremely devious in the way it propagates itself, the way that it spreads. And the narrative about rabbit rabies asserts over and over again, 6 million times a day, that human animals are all walking bioweapons and that they need to be treated in order to beat this horrific disease and to eliminate it finally and completely from the world so that everyone is safe and, in fact, no one has to die anymore. Wouldn't that be wonderful? It may have dawned upon you that the authorities who are leading this fight against rabbit rabies speak of any death whatsoever as if it is a terrible and tragic event. So, whether you die of rabbit rabies or anything else, that's unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable that death could be a natural part of life. Of course, that's the view of the transhumanists. And since they are driving this hoax, their messages to the world always carry that subtext. It's not good for anyone to die, especially of rabbit rabies. So if we eliminate rabbit rabies, in a way we're symbolically eliminating the threat of death. That's a clever little spin there. When you look into the narrative of rabbit rabies and how can you avoid it, it's been broadcast across the planet, going on almost 2 years now. 724, it's all you hear about. And the underlying message is, be afraid, be very, very afraid of rabbit rabies. But it so happens that over the 2 years or so that this program has been developing, there has also been a lot of investigation into the claims about rabbit rabies, and there's an enormous amount of evidence that exposes it as a fraud, a complete fraud. Give you an example. So there was a man who invented a test. This was back in 1949. A pregnancy test for women. And the way the test worked is that a sample of a woman's urine would be injected into a rabbit. And if the rabbit died, that meant that the chemical composition of the urine proved that the woman was pregnant. Hence that saying, kind of a joke, a sad joke. Oh, the rabbit died. Ah, your wife is pregnant. Remember that? Now that test, by the way, did not merely kill the rabbits when the urine came from a pregnant woman. In fact, it killed all the rabbits. Interesting little detail. In any case, this test for pregnancy, the dead rabbit test, was never intended to test for rabbit rabies. And even the inventor of it said that clearly. But what the perpetrators of this crime against humanity have done is that they have taken this dead rabbit pregnancy test and they've used it to detect rabbit rabies. But that is only one aspect of the extremely complicated and confusing fraud they have created in order to perpetrate genocide. As a matter of fact, they've never been able to prove that the microbe, the insidious monster microbe that causes rabbit rabies, actually exists. They call that microbe, by the way, the bunny bug, appropriately. So they've never isolated the bunny bug, and it has come to light recently that when government authorities and health officials and medical experts are confronted with the challenge, well, produce the bunny bug. Show us that it really exists. Show us that you have isolated a specimen from a live human subject. And they admit that they can't do that. And so now it appears that the case against the authorities and against the medical hoax of rabbit rabies has gained some serious teeth. Obviously, if the medical authorities and experts can't prove the primary claim of the rabbit rabies hoax, then the whole hoax collapses on that one point alone. So in view of these developments, and as I say, the increasing body of evidence proving that there is no such thing as rabbit rabies, and therefore all the measures taken against it are absurd and unnecessary, well, as the case develops, some TADs, as I said, are proposing that there should be a replay in some way of the Nuremberg trials. And in this replay, the perpetrators of the rabbit rabies hoax would be put on trial for crimes against humanity and specifically genocide, as was the case in Nuremberg between November 1945 and October 1946, an event that took 775 hours, over 216 days. There were 20 defendants, that is to say, criminals accused of the crimes, a variety of crimes. And there were a number of eyewitness testimonies, and there were 4 panels of judges from France, the UK, America, and Russia. And it was a very, very big deal. And at the end of it, most of those 20 criminals, those perpetrators accused of genocide during the Second World War, were executed. So Nuremberg 2.0 would be a replay of that, but this time, sitting in the dock as the accused, there would be everyone among the world leaders, heads of international organizations like the WHO, medical experts, politicians, heads of the great pharmaceutical corporations. All of those people would be in the dock, and they would be tried in Nuremberg 2.0. Do you get the picture? This is the scenario that's developing. But there's a really big problem with that scenario. And let me see if I can explain clearly what the problem is. In the first place, there is a semantic problem, an issue about how something is named. You see, what happened at Nuremberg was not a trial. The initials IMT, which apply to that event, stand for International Military Tribunal. It was a tribunal, not a trial. And it was a military tribunal. Now, a military tribunal is not conducted in the manner of an ordinary courtroom trial. So right there, in the first place, in the language that designates this event, there is a serious and misleading error. But hold on, it gets better. Let's say, give it the benefit of the doubt. The goal of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg was to try these war criminals, to put them on trial. So even though it might be designated as a tribunal, well, let's just say it was a trial of sorts, wasn't it? Some people would say it was a show trial, but I won't go into that comment right now, except to add a second comment that even some of the participants at the executive level among the international judges said it was a show trial. But anyway, that's another issue. But it does raise the question of whether Nuremberg 2.0 would merely be a show trial as well. Anyway, I digress. consider the stages that are required to put someone on trial. In the first place, you have the criminal or the perpetrator. Step 1, accuse the criminal of the crimes committed. Step 2, apprehend the criminal, that is to say, lay hands upon that individual. Seize them, confine them. Step 3, prosecute them in a court of law. Step 4, sentence them based on the outcome of the trial. Of course, if they're innocent, they're released, but if they're guilty, they're sentenced. And step 5, execute the sentence. Just consider those 5 steps for a moment. Now, if it were possible to replay Nuremberg in the circumstances of the moment, well, what would be required to proceed systematically through those 5 steps, right? And then that would be the execution of Nuremberg 2.0. However, there's a problem there, because if 2.0 follows the model of 1.0, then one of those 5 steps has to be eliminated. You see, the so-called war criminals who were in the dock at Nuremberg were 1, accused, 2, apprehended, 4, convicted, and 5, executed. But they were not tried. They were not prosecuted. Not according to the terms that must be met in a court of law, an ordinary court of law. Now, there are 2 reasons why they were never tried. The process just went from accusation to sentencing, conviction. They were accused and convicted, but they were never tried. Now you might think, well, hold on there, John. Wait a minute. Didn't you say that there were 775 hours of attendance in court over 216 days? Wouldn't you call that a trial? Well, yeah, it was a sort of trial, but it was a trial under the conditions, the strict conditions and protocols of a military tribunal. And certain features of that tribunal process precluded and excluded the conditions of what you and I would consider to be a fair trial, you see? So in a trial, you have the defendants, people who are accused, and then you have the attorneys for the defense and attorneys for the prosecution. Well, in the Nuremberg tribunal, the weight and power in the hands of the attorneys for the prosecution was massively preponderant compared to the power of the defense. In fact, the trial was set up so that certain of the accusations, the basic accusations that were made, could not be refuted by the defense. There was an assumption of guilt from the beginning, and the purpose of the trial was merely to go through procedures that would justify conviction and execution. You see? For instance, cross-examination is extremely important in a trial. So, if the prosecution brings a witness with evidence that condemns the defendant, the attorneys for the defendant have the right to cross-examine that witness and to break down that evidence and put it into question, but that was not the case in the military tribunal at Nuremberg. And that's not the only thing. There are numerous other factors in the procedure that did not follow the ordinary process of trial by jury. In fact, there was no jury, it was a trial by judges. And so I won't go into all the details, but I can assure you that if you go to the first-hand evidence and look at what actually happened in the tribunal, look, for instance, at the testimony of those accused. You know, you can go on the internet and you can actually find clips of them speaking in German and in some cases in English, because they were fluent in English. And you can actually hear their testimony and how they responded to the accusations against them. You'll find it in German with subtitles. And if you listen to what they said, well, guess what? Something really amazing comes to light. They didn't lie. They didn't lie about anything they said. On the other hand, if you go to the Nuremberg records and go to the videos of the trial, and you listen to the eyewitnesses who talked about a genocide program that was conducted during World War II, you'll find, in the first place, that there are very few witnesses, and that the amount of time in hours dedicated to that particular aspect of the trial, that particular war crime, genocide, you find that the time allotted to it was, I think it was something like 20 minutes, certainly less than an hour. And you'll also find, if you dig into the evidence, the first-hand evidence, that in the ensuing years, people investigated the eyewitness testimony, which was delivered verbally, of course, and in the form of affidavits, such as the Gerstein document. And in the years after the trials, some people went and they dug up these testimonies, and they proved that they were false, fabricated, and that the eyewitnesses were lying. So all in all, when you really go and look into what happened at the Nuremberg Tribunal, you find that you can't call it a fair trial, and it wasn't even a trial at all. It was just a process the authorities felt they had to go through so that they could act or appear to act legitimately in the eyes of the world in executing the accused. And they had already decided that the accused would be executed even before the trial began. Now, if you know those basic facts about the Nuremberg tribunal, then you might agree with me that there's a problem in applying that model to the situation today regarding how to deal with those who are committing crimes against humanity under the pretext of rabbit rabies, who are now every day more and more increasingly shown to be lying and deceiving. So maybe the moment has come when they could be put on trial. They are being accused of genocide. Could they be apprehended? That's a very big problem. In order to bring someone into court and try them, you have to seize them and confine them. Would it even be possible to do this with perpetrators of the current crime of worldwide genocide? Third stage, they will be prosecuted in court through a trial process. Well, forget that. Or, in this case, in Nuremberg 2.0, suppose that, yes, to be fair and to have true justice, well, they will actually be tried. How long is that going to take? A year? 10 years? 20 years? And is it possible that the crimes perpetrated under the pretext of rabbit rabies could continue, and the after effects of those crimes could continue to worsen while the trial is taking place? You see? Now there's another option for Nuremberg 2.0. If it were to be consistent with 1.0, taking 1.0 as the precedent, well, then it would eliminate the trial and prosecution procedure. So the perpetrators against the crimes of humanity today would be accused, and they are being accused. They would be apprehended, assumed to be guilty without a trial, and the next step is go directly to sentencing and execution. Is that how Nuremberg 2.0 might play out? Well, it certainly is how it might play out if it were consistent with Nuremberg 1.0. See my point? Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.